All right, we're good to go.
Okay. Hi, most of you have heard my introduction, but you'll hear it again. I'm Julie Thomas. I'm a board member of Promise Neighborhoods Lehigh Valley and an advocate for marginalized communities in the Lehigh Valley. I want to extend a radical welcome to the interns, the professors, the presenters, and the Allentown community to PNLV's Health Equity Fellowship. First, I want to thank the Dorothy Ryder Poole Healthcare Trust and the Ryder Poole Foundation for their support of this program and their ongoing contribution over many years to health equity across our community. The PNLV Health Equity Fellowship is centered in the idea that wellness is a basic human right and that everyone is worthy of a fair and just opportunity to be as healthy as possible. We recognize that locally significant obstacles to optimum health exist, such as racism, power imbalances, and poverty. These oppressive factors, as well as inequities across the social determinants of health, substantially and disparately impact the health and life outcomes of marginalized and vulnerable communities. This is the seventh of our 8 exciting informative webinars. Each webinar has 2 presenters and covers key determinants of health. The webinars will last for about an hour and a half. The presentations will be followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. The webinars will be recorded and available for you to review. Our presenters are both experts in their field and leaders and representatives of our community, and they'll share with you the inequities, challenges, and opportunities in our healthcare system. My reminder to you today is, as on every Monday, knowledge is power. Our 7th webinar topic is countering the conspiracy to destroy Black boys, interrupting the school to prison pipeline and freedom schools. Our presenters are Pastor Gregory Edwards, Darian Colbert, and Justin Simpson. And you've met Ola. She's our Health Equity Fellowship Project Director and our Webinar Manager. So I'm going to just read you these bios so you get a sense of what our presenters are about. Justice Simpson is the 3rd of 4 children. At 13, he's been blessed to make a difference at a young age. He's an author, speaker, entrepreneur, and community activist. Justice loves sports. He's been active playing league and school football and basketball since he was 5. Justice has dreams of playing in the NBA one day. Thanks to his parents, he understands that basketball success, even if he makes the NBA, will be a small part of his life. He started his first business with his sisters selling frozen lemonade when he was 5 years old. He was a natural salesman. The things he was punished for in school, his energy and never take no attitude were great for business. Never take no attitude. His excellence allowed him to co-host a weekly show with other young entrepreneurs. Following his dad's lead, he began volunteering for Promise Neighborhoods. As a volunteer, he helped to do community surveys, went door knocking, and phone banked. Power Northeast let Justice be their student representative to discuss the educational inequities in our school district, and he has become extremely knowledgeable about local issues and has been growing into a youth leader. His passion to help others has made him invaluable to the Zero Youth Violence program of Promise Neighborhoods, and he's excited about being here, and he knows he's just getting started on his journey. Now I'm going to speak about Darian Colbert. Darian is the founder and executive director of Cohesion. He served in leadership positions in urban development work since 1999. Through these roles, he's developed partnerships with leaders in universities, the public school system, and the juvenile justice system. He has traveled the world in support of Indigenous leaders, working in community development in Guatemala, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Uganda, Zambia, and South Africa. And now the Reverend Dr. Gregory J. Edwards. Reverend Edwards is the director of Power Lehigh Valley and the founder and senior pastor of the Resurrected Life Community Church, United Church of Christ, and president and CEO of the Resurrected Community Development Corporation. Under his leadership, the Church and Community Development Corporation has experienced exponential growth, evidenced by membership, financial self-sufficiency, and employment creation. A frequent lecturer at colleges and universities, he has presented to faith-based, corporate, and nonprofit sectors, has been featured in Time magazine, and has served as guest chaplain to the Pennsylvania State Senate. As a professional musician, he is a musicologist specializing in Black sacred music and jazz. Dr. Edwards currently serves as board chair for Promised Neighborhoods of the Lehigh Valley and board member for the Community First, the financially largest community development financial institution in central Pennsylvania and the Lehigh Valley, focused on improving the economic well-being of historically marginalized and underrepresented communities in Eastern PA. He previously co-chaired the Water Fountain Project, a regional task force comprised of African American and Latinx political and community leaders committed to addressing educational and economic inequities in the greater Lehigh Valley. He is the co-founder of Lehigh Valley Stands Up, a multiracial, class-crossing grassroots initiative purposed to create an equitable and just Lehigh Valley through policy change. Thank you. Okay, thank you all. Welcome again. And I think, Justice, you're going to start out. Talk to us, Justice.
Hi, my name is Justice Simpson, and I kind of feel like the school system never really cared for me as much because there were a lot of times when I wasn't treated fairly. People talked down on me. Even outside of school, people talked down on me. Like for instance, I was doing good and I had earned my way to the news. And I was at the pumpkin patch and I was on the news and stuff. And a teacher had saw it and she came to my dad's job, which is PNOV. And she had happened to say, well, he shouldn't be able to be on the news because he's such a bad kid and stuff like that. And I felt like that was actually really bad because I had just started bringing my grades up and I had really started trying. And what's it called? Next thing you know, there's a teacher talking bad on me and coming out of her way just to speak down on a kid that has nothing to do with her. Yeah, that's just really how I feel. And here's another story when a kid had spit on me. I wasn't even arguing back. He had spit on me and we had gone to a little fist fight. I got 3 weeks of ATS and he got to go back to class the next period. And and then next thing you know, the teacher, I asked the principal about it. He has no answer. I'm on punishment and I'm on punishment by the school and they're not really respecting my parents. So yeah, I just wanted to share that story with you guys. Well, those two stories with you guys. Thanks for giving me this opportunity.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, who's going next?
I'm going to throw the microphone over to Brother Darian Colbert because I think his work within the local county jails, the prison system, and some of our schools in the Valley speak directly to Brother Justice's experience that he just named and identified. So, Brother Darian. You're on mute.
Me?
My name is Darian Colbert, and I am a product of the Allentown School District. And I would say in spite of that system, I still have managed to do some work in advocacy in the nonprofit world and also in the church. And so when we look at the conspiracy to destroy Black boys, it has to begin with what Jane Elliott said in an interview She basically said that from kindergarten through 12th grade, we were indoctrinated into white supremacy. And being a Black man, I'm 49, and I can see how that is played out. And I'm going to give you kind of I'm going to speak from that perspective. So the school to prison pipeline plays a direct role into the educational system and also the juvenile justice system. So I'm going to start off with the school to prison pipeline. So it all begins right there, because we begin as Black men, Black boys, we begin to believe a narrative about ourselves, that because of the color of our skin, we're bad. And we begin to feed into that. And it's almost like, I think we assimilate. And so when we start to act whiter, then we might be considered better. And so we begin to deny our own skin color and our own identities. And so what I'm going to say about that is this: I think words play a huge part on what we begin to believe about ourselves, Black boys especially. And so for me, going through this system, I really was taught to assimilate. My mom taught me to assimilate when I began to act out at a young age because of some of the things that happened to me. I got whooped for it and told, you better act right. And so I kind of learned to kind of hide, and I kind of learned to just deal with abuse. And abuse, I believe the most devastating abuse for me as a Black man was words. And I'm even I would even call it word trauma. And the only way I can help communicate this, I would love to tell you my own story, but I worked in a jail. So I had the wonderful privilege for many years to work in a jail full time in Northampton County Jail, working with men and women. And I taught job readiness and character development. And I would leave that job and go to the Allentown School District and the after school program, teach character education to young people. And I heard a consistent theme, and it was about words. I heard a statistic that says it takes 7 positive words to cancel out 1 negative word, whether it's a word that you spoke over yourself or someone else has spoken over you. So the story I want to tell you is he was at that time, a couple years ago, he was 48 years old. And he witnessed his father get murdered by his uncle. And he had to go to court because he was the only eyewitness. And this was in Northampton County. And when he went to the court, this is what the judge said to him. And this is what he remembers about that whole thing, as the judge said, well, the bastard son of so-and-so, please come forward. Now, when he talked about the power of words in my class, he sat right in my class and we were doing an activity to highlight how powerful words are. Now, he's an introvert, if you know what that is. And so we started talking about the power of words, and he's super quiet. He's always listening. And anytime he spoke in a class, everyone became quiet because he didn't speak much. So when he did speak, everyone knew he was going to say something that was powerful. And he literally went like this. He went, ugh, like he got punched in the stomach, and he bent over when we started talking about the power of words. And I began to share my story about how words had such an impact on me. And he bent over, and I said, brother so-and-so, are you okay? And he told me that story. When I was 5 years old, I witnessed my uncle murder my dad. When I went to court, the judge said, well, the bastard son of so-and-so, please come forward. And he said, for the last 43 years, I've lived my life like a bastard. And that's what he said, wrestling with addiction, womanizing, and being violent. And I saw him change that day. Now, he was our laundry runner. And I'm telling you right now, you can see liberation on him as he walked to and from, just from a small exercise about the power of words. Now, what I want to say also about that is this. You know, a Japanese scientist believes that words are so powerful that he actually did an activity. And so what he did, he took rice, put it in a container, and spoke positive words over it and stored it away. Then he took another jar of rice and spoke negative words over it and stored it away. And I think it was like a 30-day time period. He brought both rice containers out, and the rice that he spoke positive words over was white. The rice he spoke negative words over was black. Now, if words can do that to rice, what do you think it's doing to a human being? Whether it's a big human or a little human. And so I want to talk to you about the power of words. And in the juvenile justice system, I've been working with cops, trying to bridge a gap between young people and cops, so we have safer interactions between cops and young people. And what I realized is they did this training in Lehigh County, and they brought judges from all over the state of Pennsylvania. And one of the judges in a county in Pennsylvania said when he looked at the statistics from his courtroom, he had to admit that his courtroom was racist. He had to admit it because the statistics did not lie. So you couple that with words that we hear regularly as Black boys and Black men, and you couple that with a educational system that indoctrinates into white supremacy, and then you couple that with a juvenile justice system and adult system that caters only to a certain demographic of people and really hates on another groups of people. And you have the trifecta going on for Black and brown people. And so that's why I think words are so powerful. So I believe that's kind of like the problem. Now we want to talk about some solutions. What can we do? And so in that work that I did in the prison, one of the most powerful things that we did is I am statements. And we would have people in prison say, you need to say I am statements. And we would do different things, say I am creative, I am this. And the only I am statements, the consistent I am statements I heard from people in prisons, I am a felon. I am a criminal. I'm a bad person. And I always correct them. In my class, they couldn't say that. No, I said, you are not a felon. You committed a felony act, but you are not a felon. Do not identify yourself with that. You committed a felony act, but don't label yourself as a felon. It was an act, not you. And you see both sides of the fence. I have a friend who's a doctor, and to this day, when I call him, he goes, Dr. So-and-so, may I help you? When he can see my name on the other line, and I always have to remind him, your name is so-and-so. You know what I mean? But people identify with what they do sometimes, whether it's good or bad, rather than who they really, really are. And so I believe with Black boys and Black men, we have an identity crisis going on. And I have not been fully liberated yet, but I am on my way to liberation. And that couples my working with the Freedom Schools that I partnered up with Greg in the summer of 2015, which is part of the solution, which I believe is part of the biggest solution, is really reading books about people within our own culture. And that whole experience was life-changing for me. But what I tell you about it is we had to drive down to Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee. And then we went out to Clinton, Tennessee on the Alex Haley farm. And we have Native Americans, Latinx people, and Black people all together, about 7,000 people. And we have this amazing experience embracing one another's culture. And I stood in a 7,000 person circle while we chanted Native American ancient things. And I'm telling you right now, man, I experienced the power of humanity in that space. I met C.T. Vivian in that space, God rest his soul. I met Brian Stevenson in that space. And right there, I felt like I began to wake up a part of me that has been sleeping for so long, because my mom said sleep and my mom said assimilate. The school system said assimilate, and everyone told me to assimilate and not to appreciate my Blackness. And so like W. Du Bois said, there's this dual consciousness that happened to me. So I couldn't be American, I couldn't be Black. You know, I had to be either American or Black, but I couldn't be both. And now, with the tides changing, I believe now I can be Black and I can be American, you know? And I've also heard it said that Black people in America are some of the most homeless people on the planet. And what I will know is I have a son-in-law who's from the Congo. And I always had to, growing up, I always had things, people that come from Africa are arrogant, and I would say that. And I'm reading this book on how to be anti-racist, and I read this chapter this morning, it kind of highlights that tension that exists there, right? So I thought it was just me, because I had this running theory, man, Africans are arrogant. You know what I mean? They just think they're better than every people. And that was my experience with the Adiafi twin brothers, who told me that I'm contaminated, you know, that their blood is pure, that their name can be traced back, you know, to generations, which is the truth, but I didn't like what he was saying. You know what I mean? And so reality is, because of those things, we believe a different narrative about who we are. And it really shapes your behavior. And I say what you really, really believe about yourself, not what you say to people, what you really, really believe about yourself shapes your values, and your values dictate what you do. And so for me, I'm going to get back to the Freedom Schools. The Freedom Schools offer me an opportunity to embrace everything that I am, and also to look at other cultures and see things I never knew about my own culture and other cultures. And then I had the wonderful opportunity to spend 9 weeks coordinating the Freedom Schools. And young people taught me things. 5-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 14-year-olds, and our servant leader interns taught me things about leadership, about my Blackness, and that changed my life. And then George Floyd happens, and a part of me woke up, and I feel like I'm not fully awake, but I'm more awake than I've ever been in my entire life. And I'm leaning into my Blackness, I'm leaning into my culture. I'm reading books within my culture. And I'm reading these things so it can teach me. Now I'm reading biographies that my mom really didn't tell me to read, like other people read these amazing biographies. I had to do that work on my own because my mom never told me to do that. And I'm not blaming her on it. I'm just saying I just grew up in a home that my mom really, she said, you better go to school, come home, and that's it. And when you turn 16, get a job, you know? And she told me not to go to college. She told me to get a job because she didn't want to pay for college. So sometimes even people look at me for my lack of education and they don't even know there's a story behind that, because I came home because Mr. Babb told me to go to college, and I came, Mom, he told me to go to college, and she cursed me out and said, you better get a job. And she used some explicits towards me. And I remember my heart hit the floor, and I remember I went upstairs and I wept for hours, and my mom didn't even come and console me. And I remember I came back downstairs and said, I'll get a job. And that did so much damage to me that as a 38-year man, my wife told me to go back to college, and I got angry and yelled at her. That's how much words of people of influence, like teachers, parents, guidance counselors, principals, when they speak them over kids, they have power and effect. Because even in our ignorance, we look at people in those positions and believe they should do the right thing, even when they don't do the right thing. So I believe what we have to do is we have to teach young Black and brown kids, boys and girls, we have to teach them the worth and the value. And I'll close out with this story. I was at Central Elementary doing the character education program. We were graduating our students. And we were graduating them. We had an author come in and wrote a book about worthy, loved, and being respected. And so the word worthy came up, and the one kid raised his hand and said, what does worthy mean? So my wife grabbed my arm and pulled me back, and she asked, raise your hand if you don't know what worthy means. And every single student in the class raised their hand.
Wow.
And then she said, raise your hand if you know what worthless means. And all of them raised their hand. Now, let that sink in for a minute. They knew what worthless meant, but did not know what worthy meant. We have been indoctrinated into something that is damaging our own identities. And I'm telling you right now, how do we do that? We let them know that they're amazing. What I tell students all the time is you have a superpower that no one else has, a superpower. And all the kids in element, yo, tell me, what is my superpower? I said, to be you. Your superpower is to be you. Do not hold back. Use your creativity. Use your brain. Use your energy to simply be you. That is your superpower. No one else can be you. What is a superpower? Something that no one else has. No one else can be Justice or Pastor Greg or Oli or Julie or Darian. So our superpower is to simply be ourselves. And so we look at that through a lens. So in our character education program, we look at through 7 different points. Who am I being the most important one? Friends matter. Choose, the power of choice. Think about this for a moment. When we do something that does not line up with our values, we give our power away. That's the power of choice. The next one is draw the line, which is all about your values. The next one after that is handling your business, which is about self-discipline. After that is knowing your role, and that's all about authority. And after that is taking your place, which is all about your purpose. And I said it really quickly to allow you to hear this. If you never figure out who you really are, you can never walk in your proper purpose, whether you are 5 years old or 50. And so I believe part of the solution is educating Black and brown people on their history, having them embrace who they really are, and supporting them and empowering them, like Justice, but even younger, like 5-year-olds and 4-year-olds, empowering them in their age. And so I think that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Wow. Thank you, Darian. Wow. Okay.
Brother Darian, you're going to have me follow you, huh? Okay, you and Justice. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see you all. I know some of you all on this call, so it's good to see some, well, I can't say familiar faces because I'm not seeing most of y'all's face, but I do see some names that I recognize. And so, so let me just say that I want to thank Darian for sharing his experience and making him and Justice, making themselves vulnerable, because all too often we hold, you know, we as Black African heritage folk whose faces have been kissed by the sun, we hold the vestiges within our DNA of our enslaved ancestors. We hold the vestiges of our enslaved ancestors in our DNA. We have been traumatized in ways that we are not even cognizant of. And we also pass that trauma on to our children. And we also have, as persons of Black African heritage, we also have layers upon layers of unexamined and unexpelled internalized oppression that has normalized to a certain extent much of our proclivities. And that's because we exist in a nation, in a society which is rampant with racism, but literally there is no institution, there is no system, there is no law that has not been undergirded in our nation by white supremacy and racism. We have normalized it, and we have made whiteness the benchmark for success. And so when we look at social determinants of health, when we look at health outcomes in terms of those two measurable objectives, the quality of one's life and the length of one's life, those health outcomes are directly related to systems and structures that we all must exist in. To a certain extent, not only do we exist in those systems and structures, but those systems and structures are created through policies that have a worldview that is looked at as normal, which is usually steeped in whiteness. Which is not to say whiteness is bad, but I am saying that we have made whiteness the normative goal. And when you are a person of Black African heritage and you've got within your DNA the vestiges of your enslaved ancestors, as well as unexamined and unexpunged internal oppression, your deepest desire is to associate with whiteness, as opposed to living out the fullness of your Blackness. And so what I want us to be able to take away from this conversation, and I know there's a lot of disciplines on this call. Some of you are in the nonprofit industry, some of you are in the medical profession. I would say there's not a profession on this phone call, my own included. You know, my vocation is a pastor, but most of Western Christianity, dare I say, and I don't know what faith traditions we have on the call, has been impacted and influenced by white supremacy and normalized as the Christian tradition. So these structures and these systems play out in practices and in words, and they certainly play out in the educational environment, where many of our, specifically our young Black boys and girls are educated, miseducated, and there is a pedagogy that separates in those classrooms head from heart. And so I would challenge anybody, you can't educate someone if you are trying to educate their mind, but not humanize their body. And so our young Black boys in particular, as they grow older, are looked at as men. Our young Black boys are over-examined, over-medicated, miseducated, have more on, it's just in terms of national benchmarks, have more IEPs than any singular group in the nation. The rise of Ritalin and ADHD, which has gone through all races and all cultures, but has been overdiagnosed within the African-American culture. In particular, because what we see in terms of the structures of racism and white supremacy that are embedded even in educational systems and other areas is that that simply because our children are different, they are labeled deficient. And being different does not mean being dysfunctional or deficient unless you've normalized, if you will, white supremacy and whiteness as the ultimate goal. And so what we do with our children is we try to make them respectable. Respectable doesn't stop us from getting killed by the militarization of police departments, right? We try to give them more education, thinking that maybe if we give them more pedigrees and provide opportunity of experience, maybe they will be loved and respected by other cultures and other people. Not necessarily so. And so white supremacy, let me just say this, white supremacy is not so much a person as I would say it's a demon. It's not so much a person, it's a demon that has lodged itself into the soul of the nation and has become like the water we drink. It's in the tubing, it's in the air we breathe, right? And unless we are able to recognize that, then when we try to solve it, we are all probably going to be a day late, a dollar short, or we're gonna misdiagnose it, right? White supremacy takes something from all of us. And I would dare say, if it's not addressed in this national moment, and I really hope trust and believe that America is on the precipice of its third reconstruction. I'm hoping that we are on the brink of a dynamic breakthrough in this moment, in the aftermath of Brother George Floyd's death, where there is so much outrage and protest in the streets, which is a good thing. But we have to resist and rebuild simultaneously. We've got to do both. We got to resist in the street, but then we have to rebuild a new, different kind of nation. And we've got to build a nation that is transcultural. Transcultural. It means we value and love everyone regardless of their starting place in life. So, and I want you all to recognize the systems and structures that you are a part of, that employ you, that oftentimes pay you. And the difficult thing, I think, for many of us is that when you become woke, or you are on this journey of consciousness, and you begin to locate the fact that your entire life has been built around this, there becomes an identity crisis. And you have to make a conscious, Brother Darian called a conscious choice, a decision. I think Robert Frost talked about the road not taken, the other path not taken, that you've got to make up your mind to divorce yourself from the demon of white supremacy, which might lead to a change in your vocation or a change in your calling. So I'm really interested in hearing on some of you all who are on the phone call and your experiences or your questions per se. But unless we have 1,000 of these conversations every day, because that's really where it starts. And in particular, I think both Darian and Justice also talking about their educational environments and talking about what's happening in the local prisons. One of the things that whiteness does is it makes our young Black boys invisible, makes them invisible. And when you are invisible, you're not seen. And when you're invisible, then you automatically become disposable. Because if I don't see somebody, if I literally do not see you, your existence, your family, your face, your people, your tribe, your village, if I don't see you, then you don't show up. And many of our young Black boys and girls don't show up in their full self because they know to bring their full self will be rejected, or they'll be deemed dysfunctional or deficient from a society that has said, we are here to conquer you, control you, or concubine you. I have to tell my own, I've got 4 Black children, 7 Black grandchildren. I have to tell my 22-year-old, and he's a wonderful, young, handsome man, and he's got tattoos, and he's got locks, and he's, and he drives a certain kind of car with tinted windows. And I've got to tell him there are certain places and certain things you cannot do, because I want him to come home at night. And I don't ever want to have to tell his mother, we have to go to the medical examiner's office to identify his body. That's real. Now that trauma lives in us. And what we know from the medical profession and people that do family therapy is that when you have systematically created genocide against a people, it takes 25 generations for that 25 generations for that trauma to physically leave their body. Why do you think Black folk die at higher rates than white folk? It ain't because we smoke or drink more than white folk. The pain and the trauma and what we would call in the sociological perspective, that allostatic load lives on us and begins to impact us emotionally and physiologically. When I walk through the Wegmans parking lot and all the white women begin to lock their car doors, or when I'm in the aisle and people push their cart through me as if they don't see me, or when I'm on the elevator and the conversation stops and the laughter stops and everybody finds the 4 corners of the elevator, or when I'm walking through Macy's and the Lehigh Valley Mall or a department store and I'm followed and asked, did I pay for that? All of those microaggressions are like 1,000 cuts that we have to deal with every day. It is in us. We just are resilient. There's something in us that refuses to die. But there's also something in white supremacy that says that Black people have some type of criminogenic gene, that we are more prone to be criminals or lazy or worthless, or fill in the blank with some other derogatory term. And that's what has to be exposed, expelled, and exercised, I think, from the soul of our nation and all of our systems: the political system, the economic system, and the financial system, the educational system, the medical system, the nonprofit industrial complex system. So that's a lot of work. But that work of deconstructing those systems that are built on a worldview of white supremacy happens on an individual level. People have to experience those that they have, in the words of Martin Buber, a theologian, that those that they have thingified or othered. Because if I'm up in your space and you see me in my full human self, in my full Black self, I absolutely believe that you will see me differently. But we've got to be up in each other's space to a certain extent. I also believe that white folks need their own recovery group. White folks need to be in recovery from whiteness because it's an addiction. Nobody on this phone call asked to be born Black or white. It's the skin we are in. But I will tell you that I have seen white privilege steal excellence from white people who wake up on third base thinking they hit a triple and have privilege dripping off of them that they're not even aware of, who have been led to believe the lie that meritocracy and hard work will provide a level playing field for all of us. That's a lie. Some of us have worked really hard and the opportunities still don't exist. Meritocracy is a myth, and that is not to deny hard work. That's not to deny hard work. That's not what I'm saying. But when the benchmark is whiteness, and white privilege always is a day early and $2 more, that is problematic. It's very problematic. And so I'm excited about those of you on the call, and I hope we can get into a robust discussion. You know, if you don't know about critical race theory, I would ask that you read up on it, but I would also ask that you simply don't intellectualize the plane of Black people. It's good to read a book, but more importantly than reading a book, more importantly than reading White Fragility and going into, because we love to intellectualize the pain of others and then become experts in another's pain. You got to get into an environment where some of your own folk can call you out in real time, right? We got to be able to be open to be called out in the appropriate forum, to be interrupted. I think in English grammar, it's called the comma. Like, wait a minute. And those conversations have to happen in your intimate spaces. They have to happen at the Thanksgiving dinner table. They have to happen in your households of faith, at those family barbecues. We have to stop excusing Uncle Bob or Uncle Tom and whatever their names are, and that's just the way he is or she is, that they'll never change. No, when you know better, my grandmama said you got to do better. So I'm gonna step back. I see some good questions coming in.
Yes, yes. So thank you so much, everyone who's spoken so far. I don't know if this question is for Darian or Pastor Greg or for Justice, but Kimberly first said that she has a question, Kimberly Brown. So I'm going to give the floor to her and ask her to unmute.
Hi, are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, terrific. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your comments. Let me come off, maybe bring the video up as well. Thank you very much. So I had one comment and one question. One thing that as a pediatrician that I also have experienced with the patients and families that I serve here, and that I think is important, just like it's important to talk to children and see them as they are and build them up in terms of their value as a person. I find that that's also very important with their parents. I try very hard when I'm seeing families to give real feedback to parents about how much I appreciate the efforts that they're making, how well they communicate, how well they take care of their children, and what a good job they're doing. Even when they're struggling with things sometimes, I think that really makes for an excellent sense of support for them, and also really facilitates a good partnership in working together to solve whatever problems they're experiencing that we're working on together. And the second thing is my question, which is that I do not personally specialize in treating ADHD, but you brought that up as a very good example. And my specific question is this. When we are diagnosing ADHD, it is supposed to be symptoms that are documented, but very importantly, in association with those symptoms causing difficulty or creating barriers for the child to be able to do the things that they would like to or need to do. And that's supposed to be based upon input from both the child and the parent, and also we talk with the school teacher. So my question is that what are your suggestions about trying to get at the heart of that? Because if the parent is coming in with concerns that this really is creating difficulties for the child to try to do schoolwork at home or to focus on things at home, I think that's very often something that then lends itself to making that diagnosis and sometimes considering medication in addition to counseling or other things. So I'd just appreciate your hi Hassan, hi there. I'd appreciate your comments on that. And thank you very much again.
Okay, I want to make sure I can get the question succinctly. So how can you as a service provider partner with the parent? Is that what you're, I want to try hearing you right, to getting the question right.
I think the specific question pared down is, if we're saying that to make the diagnosis correctly, we have to say that it's causing impairment for the child. How do we make sure that that impairment is defined not on the provider's terms, right, but on the real terms of the parent and the child, and that we aren't imposing somehow our own expectations onto that?
Okay, thank you. So I'll let others weigh into this as well. But I mean, one of the things that all of our systems have are these wonderful checklists. And I think, there's a saying that organizations can be no better than the employees that they hire. So if we are hiring people to provide services to families that don't understand the cultural distinctives of that family, then once again, they might view this family experience as not being normative or regular or appropriate. So, I think, personally, I think it's incumbent upon the person who's providing services and the organization that's hiring that person to ensure that whenever we are doing an assessment in school, whenever we are doing an assessment by a medical provider, whenever we are doing a service from a nonprofit, are we applying a critical race lens in the questions that we are asking? Because there's no assessment, there's no question on some of those forms that's not steeped in a particular worldview. Even if those questions are best practiced, researched questions from a specific discipline and field of study, right? So, we can read books, and, I like to read books. I always read, so who wrote this book? I want to read the footnotes on the book. I want to know the school the person went to, because I want to know what's shaping their worldview to come up with this assessment. That seems like a heavy lift, right? But it is a heavy lift. If you are providing services to a human being, which I believe is one of the most noble professions that any of us can have, to be in the people business. We can't be in the people business and apply assessments or questions or tools without having some level of understanding around critical race theory and applying this critical racial lens to the questions that we're asking. Which means in many cases, there's a great cultural divide between the teacher and the student, or the home care health provider and the family, right? And we're assuming that that form is non-biased. Implicit bias runs through the veins of all of us. And that implicit bias shapes those worldviews, which then shows up in a certain kind of way. So, you know, I go by the philosophy as a pastor, as an organizer, as a community leader, that those who are closest to the pain need to be the ones that are in charge of their destinies and futures, right? And that sometimes means that we have to help empower folks, specifically if you have been made invisible, because many folks many of our families that I've dealt with will absolutely pass on and abject their own power and give it to somebody else, saying, well, you know, you're the teacher, you tell me, you know, but teachers don't know everything. Neither do doctors, neither do lawyers, right? They're asking questions from the framework of their understanding. So I think we've got to question the way that we are assessing, and we've got to make sure that we hear the voices of those that we are working with.
And I would just add, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I would just add, they had a wonderful TED Talk that you encouraged us to watch from Nadine Burke-Harris, I believe. And it's from it's TED Med Tech. She did a wonderful job explaining what Greg just explained, but even for you people who want to look at the field, because they're the ones that I believe started the ACEs test and everything else, or started talking about it. So I would encourage you to watch that TEDx talk. It's a TED Med Talk, and it's Nadine Burke-Harris, and she talks about how childhood trauma affects health across a lifetime. That is a wonderful TEDx talk that I think will further help you understand what Greg just really, really did a wonderful job explaining.
Hello? Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I totally agree. And I just feel like as a kid, the district should just like really care and and move from love at the same time, because I have been through a lot since growing up from kindergarten. And there's a lot of teachers who would act one way with students, and then when the principal or a parent comes into the class, act a whole nother way, act like they were doing the best they can. And that's not always the case. Yes, there's some teachers that do care, but there's a lot that also don't. And I would just like want most of the districts to just speak and move from love. Thank you.
And I would second what Justice says, and what he said is powerful, right? But it also goes to what Carmen Bell asked, what then is the course of action? How do we change this dynamic and infuse our young Black boys and girls with a feeling of worthiness? How do we change what's being taught in the schools? And here's a thought. So I engage the school system, and I'm in partnership with them. And what I want to tell you is they just recently adopted restorative practices, right? And they said this is an evidence-based program and it works, and restorative practice. And I'm having a meeting with administrators, and I had to push back and say, see, once again, you did what you've always been doing. We've been a horrible school system for a long time. You did, once again, you brought something in without engaging your community or people, like Greg says, close to the pain. So you bring restorative practices in, but that does not change the teacher's teaching. See, that's part of the issue. If you've been watching through social media some of the interviews that Darla Mario has been doing, I mean, you see that some of the teachers are the problem. Restorative practices focuses on the kid and not on the teacher itself. We need systems that address the teacher's behavior and how they engage students. Because when you can call students derogatory names and get away with it, well, you can do some of the behaviors that happen within the school system. I mean, and then there's no consequence. You know, and I find it interesting when I sat with an administrator, and he said the average length of a teacher in this building is 15.6 years. And my wife said to him, and you say that like that's a compliment. And we began to challenge him and say, no, you brought in restorative practices, but you didn't even engage the community to find out if that, and listen, restorative practices is expensive. It's super expensive. And we had teachers that have gone through it that told us, I still don't know what restorative practice is. And they paid all this money for me to go. And I still do not understand how to do it, what it is, and what to do. But yet she went through the training, he went through the training, and yet they still don't know what it is. That's what I'm talking about. And before this came along, we had Dr. Sahorchek. We talked to him when he was the superintendent for a brief moment. We talked to him and he was like, what about this program? What about this program? Highlighting all these other evidence-based programs. But like Charlotte Plain said from Harrisburg, she said the programs that go away, that should stay, go away. And the programs that stay should go away. And what we've done is evidence-based can be bought. And I'm not saying that to say, all I'm simply saying is, I'm talking about people from Harrisburg. It's easy to fudge things. And I'm not saying people do it, I'm just saying evidence-based is a good product. All I'm simply saying is, when you look at a program, say this is evidence-based program, and you look, and we look at the inner details of it, I'm like, I mean, and that's providing numbers, and I can look at the program and see that that's not even being really effective. By the years of service, I've observed this program, but yet it continually stays, and it's a vehicle that we use to train our kids up, which is steeped in white supremacy. And it further promotes the idea that in our Black is bad and white is good. And is it the right way or the white way? And then this narrative goes in our mind, and we still have this identity crisis going on, like, wait a minute, you know? And so that's what I'm talking about. So I know there's a lot of other questions, so I'm not gonna get on my soapbox, but I think we need to have people closest to the pain sitting down and having conversations with people who are making decisions for our kids in the educational system.
What we've learned from Freedom Schools, there was a question about Freedom Schools, is that every child can learn, but every person can't teach.
Greg, could you also provide us some background? I think Mark asked for some background about how did Freedom Schools start?
Sure. And Darian mentioned Freedom Schools, and he was one of our program directors. So let me just say that Freedom Schools is a national model that is sponsored by the Children's Defense Fund. Many of you on the call may have heard of the Children's Defense Fund. The president emeritus of the Children's Defense Fund is Marian Wright Edelman. Dr. Edelman was the first Black woman to graduate from Mississippi with her law degree. As a lawyer. In 1964, Dr. Edelman and many other college students descended into Mississippi during what is now called the Mississippi Freedom Summer. And they registered Black folk to vote, because Mississippi was the last state in the Union to provide a pathway for Black folk to be able to vote. That was a very bloody summer. That was the summer of Goodman, Cheney, and Swanner. That was the summer when young white students from Oberlin and Yale and Black students went to Mississippi, registered them to vote, and then as they were registering the adults to vote, they were working with young people and children. They were working with them in community centers. They were working with them in parks. They were working with them under poplar trees, and they were teaching them about their constitutional rights and civic engagement as young Black students. And they were informally called Freedom Schools. And so Dr. Edelman, years later in 1995, really took the curriculum that they used through the University of North Carolina, developed what's now called the integrated reading curriculum, which is a best practice curriculum that is used in Freedom Schools around a model that engages 5 different pillars: parent involvement, civic engagement, mental health and nutrition, cultural competence. And that really is what undergirds the Freedom School program that is in operation today. They are 6 weeks in length. They go from Monday to Friday from 8 to 3. And because it's called Freedom School, right? When you name something, Darian talked about the power of words, the power of words. It's called Freedom School, Liberation School. right? And that pedagogy, that integrated reading curriculum marries both head and heart. The students are not called students, they are called scholars. And their instructors, their teachers are called servant leader interns. The servant leader interns are all college enrolled students from area colleges who are trained by the Children's Defense Fund. They are certified on the integrated reading curriculum. They come back and they deliver in an intergenerational kind of learning laboratory this 6 weeks worth of curriculum for students in grades K through 12. And everything is very intentional. It's a full-bodied experience. The children are all provided a nutritious lunch, a nutritious breakfast. The day begins with what's called Harambe. Harambe is Swahili for let's pull together. And so the students start off in a collective space where they can get their energy out, where we can see their vibrance and their brilliance and their emotion. There's a time of cheers and chants that's led by the servant leader interns. And they're called servant leader interns with the understanding that if you are fortunate to stand in front and with people and you can educate and shape them, then you are there to serve. Because the best of leadership serves alongside of. And so those scholars and those servant leader interns, depending upon their grade level, and all the children have a pre, mid, and post evaluation to see what their reading scores are as they come in, they co-create learning environments that are vibrant. And so there is reading level 1, K through 2, reading level 2, 3 through 5, reading level 3, 6 through 8, and then reading level 4, 9 through 12. And these are our children. We've done it here in Allentown with children in the Allentown School District. We provide them also with a resource-rich environment. We believe that our children absolutely can learn if they're placed in a loving environment that doesn't separate head from heart, and they are absolutely given love, unconditional regard, care. They are seen, and that they read stories, as Darian indicated, from books written by folk that look like them, and about folk whose stories they would also reflect in their homes. It's not a cheap enterprise. It's about $1,500 per student. And we don't charge families anything. We believe our children deserve the best. And so it's an incredible opportunity. You can go to the RCDC website, rcdclv.org, or you can go to the Children's Defense Fund website and learn more about the specifics of Freedom Schools. We've created in Allentown in the last year, we've created the Lehigh Valley Freedom School Partnership. Because the Resurrected Community Development Corporation has been the primary incubator and sponsor working with the Children's Defense Fund, but we decided to make the table a little wider and longer. So we invited other partners, Darian's organization, Cohesion, Promise Neighborhood, the United Way is at the table, the City of Allentown is at the table. I'm a member of United Church of Christ. All 160 of those churches in the Penn Northeast are at the table. And we've raised close to $100,000 as of this moment. We didn't do it this year because of COVID-19 and because where our facilities are located, we are in the track that has the highest rate of positive folk with COVID-19. So we decided not to put our staff, our volunteers, and our children at risk. But we are looking at launching 4. We have a lofty goal of launching 4 Freedom Schools in the summer of 2021. That's about $300,000. So I want to encourage you to get involved, and you are certainly welcome to follow up with me and or Brother Darian for additional information.
So I think since I'm looking at the questions, if you're okay, Ola, is it all right if I walk us through them, or did you want to do that?
Oh, no, please do. No, that's great. Thank you.
So I'm looking at Noel Kelly. The question is, what do you suggest we implement cultural competency education in the healthcare and education systems? I will say at minimum, do something like that. But I think it needs to be ongoing education in this area. I think because this system is so steeped in it, I think we need to really be training ourselves and ongoing. And I also think like people, I mean, ever since I've grown up, you hear courageous conversations. And that right there, I think we've been having courageous conversations for over 30 years. We need to move from courageous conversations to courageous relationships and really sit in that space, in that tension, and have honest dialogue about how we go from here to over here. And we need to build a bridge, but the bridge can't be built on cursed ground. It has to be built. So it's almost like the foundation has to be tore up. Together we build this foundation that's rooted in unity, justice, and equity. And then we build a bridge together to go from where we currently are to where we desire to be. And I just think it's training. I think teachers and medical professions need ongoing training. And because we are where we are, I would even say at minimum 2 trainings a year, but then they should be also engaging other people outside of their race to engage and have relationships with other people that are different than them. Back in 2000, I went to a leadership thing in Atlanta, Georgia, and I remember the guy, Dr. Howard Hendricks, said, he was 7 years old at the time, and he said, my encouragement to all of you sitting in this room is this. And the number one thing he said, spend time with someone different than you, of a different ethnic background than you. And he said that, and he was 7 years old, he's a white dude, and he said that. He said, I spent time, he says, now I'm later on in my years, I spent time with 3 different people different than me and challenged me. And I want to encourage some of you on the call to do that, but also simple things. Like I think when the new Jim Crow came out, we did a I want to say a small group with the book, and we talked about the new Jim Crow, right? And so there are really, really, really good books out there that you can create conversation with people who are different than you in a safe space. So you can say in your unknowing, hey, let me ask a question. You know that it's safe for you to ask a question in that space. And so I'd encourage you to engage people who are different than you and say, hey, would you be willing to do a book club with me and how to be an anti-racist? You know what I mean? Can you do a book club with me in Just Mercy? You know, or can you do, I think those are some of the things that need to happen for us to turn this ship around. And it's not going to happen overnight. I think we all know that this is a marathon, not a sprint. You know, this is only the beginning. Like Derek said, we have to have thousands more of these conversations to even have some sort of impact in these spheres that we live in, to have change for our community and for our young people. And so I don't know if Greg, you wanted to say anything about that, or if Justice wanted to say anything about that as well, before I move on to the next question.
We have to train and we have to educate the mind, but we also have to educate the heart. And it's a matter of mind and heart. And so this is a both and, it's not an either or. We have to, you know, we have to really, I mean, and that's what privilege has done, right? Privilege says that you don't have to learn about any other person's culture because your culture is the dominant culture, you know? And so when Darian talks about having this dissonance between being Black and being American, when you have a nation steeped in white supremacy, to be American is to be white, which is why some Black folks have had a problem even, you know, pledging their allegiance to the flag, right? The whole kneeling that we're seeing is out of protest and saying that we built a nation that has consistently rejected us through public policy, that has toxified us because of institutions and also toxic charity. So I would also recommend, somebody asked about reading, there's a lot of books out there. I would be careful what you read. You know, be very careful. You might want to ask somebody. I think that Robin DeAngelis does a good job around white fragility. I think that there's some wonderful talks by Tim Wise. Those are all white scholars that are writing about white supremacy, white privilege, and racism. I also think, you know, there's a book that I would recommend called The Condemnation of Blackness. The Condemnation of Blackness by Khalil Gibran Muhammad, who was curator of the Schomburg. And in that, he talks about how the racist field of sociology, that the sociological field actually made a determination that the darker someone was, the more prone they were to being a criminal. And they embedded that in the social service systems of the nation to lead people to believe, right, that if you're Black, you're dysfunctional and you are more prone to steal, you are more prone to engage in reckless behavior, or are more prone to be in need of policing, right? So those are good books to read also. You know, The Experience of Being Black, you know, and you know, I've been Black all my life. So, so the reality is also when we have conversations like this and it's uncomfortable, Black people automatically become the experts because of experience, and white folks have to be the students. And that's not a position that many white folks are comfortable being in. So there has to be an exchange, right? And so it's got to go beyond books. It's got to go to the head. It's got to go to the heart. And being in, as Darian said, dynamic relationship with. And this is, it's painful because what we're having to do is demythologize the entire American narrative. The entire American narrative has to be demythologized. You can't, Darian said, you can't build on cursed ground. And I subscribe to that. So, you know, those of you that are on the call from Allentown, you know, Allentown is a city named after a slave trader. What does it mean to work and to worship and to walk the streets of Turner, named after Joseph Turner, one of the biggest slave traders on the eastern seaboard? William Allen's daughter married Benjamin Chew, Chew Street, another slave trader. Joseph Tillman, Tillman Street, another slave trader. So it is, we have a high school, the largest high school, William Allen High School, is named after William Allen, who was a slave trader. His business partner was Joseph Turner. And that's real. I mean, that's absolutely real. That's the ground that we're walking on. And so when we wonder, how is it that a city that has become 71% Black and brown and marginalized people has no political or economic leadership that reflects the current demographic? At the end of the day, if we get this right, there's going to be an exchange of power. There's going to be an exchange of power. But I'm reminded by the words of our ancestor, Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. Ain't nobody giving up power without some level of protest. And then after the protest, there's got to be a change in policy. And I come from the school of thought that, you know, when the people in power meet the power of the people, there's going to be an exchange of power, for sure, for sure. And I think that that scares people. And I think it scares a whole lot of folk, because I think part of what we don't want to have this discussion around, if I can just kind of permission to step out on a skinny branch, is that there is a fear of the blackening and browning of America. There's a fear of that. And that if people who are Black and brown actually are in positions of power without the pathology of whiteness, that Black and brown people will do to white people what white people have done systematically to Black and brown people. If that were the case, it would be over a long time ago. I think most Black and brown folk that I know of are looking for equity, not vengeance. Equity, right? But we have to have an honest conversation. We have to have these honest conversations that are very uncomfortable. They're very uncomfortable. But I'm reminded that part of what white privilege has done, specifically, unfortunately for white people, is to be in environments where you are comforted. And I'm reminded, you know, that as I saw my 4 children being born, no life can come forward without some struggle or level of pain. So when you are literally in every environment that opens doors for you, when you're in every environment that, you know, you don't have to feel uncomfortable, someone rescues you out of feeling uncomfortable, you can never grow. You can't grow. You got to be challenged in order to grow. And I think, you know, psychologists tell us that after the age of 21, we don't grow from our victories. We grow from our challenges and painful experiences.
I think the next question is, can you further explain what you mean by whiteness as an addiction? And I think what Pastor Greg and I heard Episcopal pastor speak, and his speech was, "I'm addicted to my whiteness." And so I think if you want further explanation on that, I think Pastor Greg can get you in touch with that Episcopal pastor that might be able to explain to you what he meant by being addicted to whiteness, unless Justice or Pastor Greg wanted to share their own thoughts about what that means.
Yeah, I put it, I think I put some of my responses in the chat box. Ola, I can't see it. If you want to read it, you can, if you can go back and.
Sure. Yes, so this is for Emmeline. You said racism and white supremacy has made whiteness the highest goal, objective benchmark to be achieved, and often masquerades as excellence. We can't get away from it without consistent, intentional acts of deconstruction.
So it's like being addicted to any other thing. I mean, and you know, unless there's a level of intentional internal examination, we will always recenter, we will always recalibrate on the normative, and the normative is white culture. And I will say that white supremacy, as I said, I think I may have said earlier, is going to kill us all. It's just going to kill Black and brown folk quicker. I mean, we have seen the health disparities in COVID-19, and we have seen, regardless of your political affiliation, we have seen how this current administration has handled it, and white folk are dying too, as the result of inequitable health policies. So we cannot escape white supremacy by zip code or by street address. It's robbed, I think it's robbed people of the ability to think critically. So I've got, I mean, and this is not a bad thing, I have a lot of white colleagues. Some of them are clergy, some of them are in academia, some of them are friends, who are asking me, Greg, what should I do? And I'm thinking to myself, you got a PhD, brother. You got a PhD, sister. You have had all that privilege and all that money and all that education. And I understand they're leaning on me for direction, but it must be nice to live in a world where you never have to examine any other person's way of being besides yourself. And so I'm seeing these very highly educated folk that when it comes to race, what privilege has said is, you ain't got to worry about that. Well, guess what? We're in a time of national unrest. This should be everybody's concern. You know, it's not just about George Floyd. It's about him, but the protests that we're seeing on the street, it's about our mothers being denied health care. It's about, when we talk about Black boys, we can't talk about Black boys without Black families. And we realize that public policy in this nation made it illegal for men and women to be cohabitating in housing projects that were government funded by having a man in the house. So we, through public policy, robbed children of their fathers and said if that woman was living with that man, she would not get any public assistance. That's an example of public policy, racialized public policy, that has actually disenfranchised the Black family. But then what we want to do usually is put it on the family. Well, if there was better, if they were more manly at home. Families are raised in the context of their political environment and systems and structures over which most have no control, outside of voting. But we also know that that's a struggle too, right? Because when we show up to vote, oftentimes our vote is suppressed.
So thank you, Pastor Greg. I see Katara joined us. Did you want to add anything, your expertise to this?
Oh, no, not at all. This is enough for all of us to take in. This is beautiful. I'm here to listen, but you are absolutely right when you say that we can't build on cursed land. And it's the same thing when we talk about growing our own food or putting whatever it may be into the soil. If it is cursed and it is not, we are not acknowledging where and who it has really come from, then it will not grow. So thank you for including that part, Reverend Greg. But yeah, I'm good to go. I'm enjoying just being here.
Just making sure.
So I would ask you to look at your boards. For those of you that are employed by nonprofits, for those of you that are employed by hospital systems, who's on your board? I would ask you to look at your management structures and systems. I would ask you to look at the racial makeup of your organizational chart. Because the part of when we're talking about the addiction to this, and part of what we've done, because we're uncomfortable having the race and justice conversation, is what we've done is we've created nonprofits, and nonprofits in and of themselves are not bad. but most nonprofits that I know of are run by people that don't look like the folks they're providing services for. And so we've actually built a tertiary economy for white folk on the backs of Black folk pain. So if we get this right, unemployment for some folks is going to go up. That's an automatic, because you can't have both and. But we cannot say that if we provide charity and consistently provide charity, and we're doing it in an equitable way, that's somehow going to recalibrate inequity. It's not going to create a level Lehigh Valley or a level landscape. And most of the nonprofits that I know of are run by white men and white women and providing services to Black children or brown children or poor white children.
So the next.
Oh, Darian, I just wanted to make sure that you got the question. So you're moving on to Chelsea's question, or?
Yes. So
Yes, okay.
Chelsea asked a question. Do you believe that is that what you're talking about, Ola? About do you believe that educators may benefit from training / classes coming more from a trauma-informed and white privilege lens and the negative effects it has in health? That is a really good question. And obviously, trauma-informed care, I think, for me, I think Greg is very eloquent in talking about it, but I believe if you're going to do trauma-informed care and you talk about privilege, I think, because I always like to say it like this, when we engage people in conversations, when I talk to people and I've had these conversations, I have them all the time. And I'm not looking for behavior modification. I'm hoping as I engage you that perspective modification happens. And so I'm not looking, I don't want to change people, because think about it, as parents, you can't change your kids. You can only give them a different perspective. So you can say, don't do that, don't do that. That's behavior modification. But if you get to if you can change their perspective, then their behavior will follow their perspective. And so I think if you do trauma-informed care and you do start looking at things like from a white privilege lens, people are going to be super uncomfortable, but I think it might have an impact because people can see the inequities. They'll be able to see, wow, that wasn't right what we just did, because that family just came in 3 hours ago and this is what we did for them. And this family just came in here and this is how we provided care for them. Now you're forced to see the inequities. And then when you see something, you have to do something about it, rather than just be like, because it's easy to believe the narrative that we've been kind of told all our lives. And I go way back to Black is bad and white is good. And so it's easy when people come in, oh, we treat them a certain way, and then other people, I've seen it happen even in line with me at Wegmans going to get shrimp. I've seen it in line, a guy ignores me, and this is 3 weeks ago, and then someone else comes in, hey, can I help you? And that's just a micro, and it happens. It happened 3 weeks ago. And I left out of there, and I told my wife, she asked, what took you so long? I said, you saw me standing there, the guy completely ignored me, gave me his back, and just stood there and started washing something. As soon as a white older guy showed up, he turns around and begins to do something. Those are just, and I walked out or didn't say anything because, I'm like, no, I'm not even going to waste my energy. But those are some of the things that happen. So when you help people see, wow, those things are happening, so someone else can see that and be like, hey, sir, he was first. That's wrong. I wasn't here first. He was first. So anyway, I think that's just coming from me. I think it will be beneficial if we start doing trauma-informed care for teachers and medical profession people. So
that was my question. And I'm a senior, I'm going to be going to be a nurse soon. I'm a senior nursing student this upcoming fall. And when you look up most trusted professions, it's nurses obviously come first, and that's great. But I also think it's a shame considering how much time educators spend with children.
Absolutely.
You have teachers that you see from kindergarten through, whatever, 6th grade, and then from high school, and then from whatever. And I think that personally from my experience, I went to Parkland, but I had 0 Black teachers, maybe 1 my entire time. And I think a lot of the times, especially in Allentown, I also know some Allentown teachers, and some of them are great. And some of them are really just these kids don't do their homework, blah, blah, blah. And they have no idea where they're coming from and what they're dealing with at home and things like that. So I just think we need to, that's why I would love everyone's opinion. I think maybe the educators should maybe get some trauma informed and just some history and just because you're spending all these time with these children. And like you said, your words matter, what you're saying to these kids from the morning they wake up till 3 p.m., however long school goes, it matters. So I just think like as a nurse, I don't really spend much time with children, and I would like love to. I know there's a pediatrician, but I just sometimes I'm like, maybe I should be a teacher, but I think that teachers should be a little more educated maybe on the topic, considering how many students it affects. Going back to, I think he left, but yeah, but it's okay.
Okay, gotcha.
Justice, yeah, but that's okay. Yeah. So yeah, what do you guys? I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Unfortunately, this is Justice's dad. We lost Justice for the rest
That's
of this call.
okay. Yeah, that's okay.
His best friend just died.
No, I loved his insight, and I wish I could have said thank you for sharing everything that he shared. So.
Yeah, I will do my best to fill in for him.
No,
but his best friend just died in a fire.
Oh,
so while we were on this call, so he is no longer any good for us. So I'm doing the daddy thing while still trying to make sure we stay health equity. But you know, positive affirmation, power of words, right? We talk about the power of words. As his dad, right? One of the things I have to remind him of right now, that this is not his fault. Right now, he's going through it right now. He's asking, why did they take his best friend? You know, why did he have to die? You know, so positive words, understanding things, reminding the way we start our day off every day, my children. We've been doing this for about 7 years. We start our day off with, I love me, I'm worthy. Some people may not like me, but I don't care, because the people that matter, I'll be glad that I'm here. And then we go through an I love my life celebration, right? Because we should all love our lives, you know, and then understanding what, you know, why we do it, right? So we say, I think good, I do good, I am good, so I can have a great day. I'm healthy, I'm wealthy, I'm wise. We do everything in a prosperous way. Those are things that we can, little chance that we can remind our kids for. As I'm running to the store to, you know, get what he asked for. You know, our lives just changed in the middle of this call. So I had to allow my son to be a child again. So I do apologize that he will no longer be available.
No apology needed.
Sending Justice love and light, brother.
Yes,
sending him love and light. Sending him love and light.
Absolutely.
Let me just say this too. These are systems, right? So these are systems. And the quickest way to stop a conversation that you really want to further around race is to call somebody a racist or a white supremacist. These are systems and structures that have to be deconstructed. And the complexity of this conversation is no one wants to be called a racist, most folk that I know of. No one wants to be called a white supremacist, but there are systems that are insidious and really incestuous, and they work together in a very invisible and sometimes not so invisible way that we are all caught in. So just as Dr. King said that we are all tied together in an inescapable web of mutuality, what affects one affects all, right? This has impacted all of us. And this is hard work. It's hard work to divorce yourself sometimes from the person you've become. And sometimes from the person you've become, which also means to a certain extent, alienating people who love you. I'm reminded of many of the white civil rights workers that walked with John Lewis, marched with Dr. King, many of them rabbis, many of them clergy, many of them college students. When they came back home, their church terminated their employment. Their marriages ended. Because you might be on a journey that the person that you love is not on with you. That's real talk. Or you might be on a journey as an employee that your organization is not on. That's real talk. So, I want us to look at this as a system and structures, but those systems and structures are created by people with worldviews that the media has also shaped. And all of those collide together so that when I or Darian are standing at the deli counter at Wegmans, the clerk doesn't see us. It doesn't mean the clerk is evil. Doesn't necessarily mean the clerk is bad. But what happens then to Black folk is we become very hyper vigilant. Because whenever we step out into spaces, workspaces, public spaces, shopping centers, our very body is political. And we often wonder, will we be seen? And part of what white supremacy has done is it's dehumanized Blackness. It's dehumanized Blackness. So, I mean, there's studies done, there have been studies in the medical professions that have been done. American Medical Association has done some research that many medical providers believe that Black folk don't feel the same level of pain as white folk. Literally. Or they'll be resilient, they'll get over it. There's a dismissing of the humanity of Black people. Or we're overreacting. Or we're being too emotional. And so what that creates, and Darian mentioned this, what that creates is what Du Bois called cognitive dissonance, or a doubled self. Where when we show up in environments, we have to be sure, we'll always ask the question, who's gonna be there and how am I gonna show up? And I can guarantee you, if you're working with other persons of color, they're always asking themselves that question, because survival is the first law of nature. We have to survive those spaces. We have to survive those business meetings. We have to survive those board meetings. I mean, it's just reality. And so what happens is that creates that trauma within us that actually physiologically has an impact on our body. You know, why are Black folks in general predisposed to diabetes and high blood pressure and premature death? It's not because, I mean, there's that trauma sits in our DNA. It rearranges on a molecular level. When you're not seen, when you're not heard, when teachers call kids bad and don't isolate behavior, or when that social worker deems that family tradition as being irrelevant. So, you know, we've got to wrestle with this. And this is messy. We can read books, we can educate ourselves, but these are messy conversations. And when we have conversations about race, white supremacy, and Black disposability, at the end of this conversation in 30 minutes, we are not going to put a bow on this conversation. And you might feel worse than you did when you entered the call. That's real. That's real talk. But that's the first step in self-examination. Those of you that are asking about educators, I would point you to a brother that's on the West Coast. I think he might be at Cal State. He moves around. He was at San Francisco State before. His name is Jeff Duncan Andrade. He's done great work on detoxifying educational environments from white supremacy. And he talks about the segregation of public schools, that most of our inner city schools are underfunded, are racially segregated, and lack adequate resources. And that our children show up with that allostatic load, but they are expected and held to, if you will, the same benchmark as someone in a well-resourced school. So when we see some of these mass shootings at some of these schools, most of them white schools, predominantly white schools, there's an infusion of, you know, psychologists and school counselors, and there's all of these resources, right, that are poured into that school to deal with the fact that this school has dealt with a significant trauma. And I would suggest that specifically in our urban educational environments, our children have just recalibrated themselves to the trauma, but are held to the same standard as a well-resourced school.
Yeah, absolutely.
How can you teach a kid, how can you teach a child that hasn't eaten since the last time they were in school? And how can we in 2020 still use an antiquated formula for how we fund public education? That literally, you've all heard this, that your zip, the biggest thing that really determines quality of your zip code. Your zip code determines oftentimes the quality of life and the longevity of life. That your zip code also determines the quality of your child's education. Because we still fund public education primarily off of property taxes. So if you're in an environment that has a robust tax infrastructure, like Parkland or East Penn, your children are going to be allocated certain resources. Somebody asked a question in the chat, about the Allentown School District and what's going to happen in the midst of COVID-19. So I work and worship in Allentown, and 2 of my 4 children graduated from the Allentown School District. My other 2 younger children graduated from Parkland. And so I live in Parkland. Though I work in worship and some of my family live in Allentown. And I will tell you the response in terms of the resources, night and day. Parkland literally flipped a switch because they are a one-to-one learning environment. When we entered and we bought the property and we were at the back to school night, they asked us about our bandwidth. They asked how many computers we had in the house. And literally all the superintendent had to do, SNIZAC, is just flip a switch for the most part and move from in-person learning to virtual learning. Mm-hmm. It's a well-resourced school. Different environment in Allentown. Different environment.
I'm gonna jump in there and say this. That was a perfect, and I did want to say, how will the ASD go online impact? It's gonna have a great impact on students. And we saw that through giving out of computers. You saw that. I mean, there's 17,400 kids in the district, or maybe more, maybe less, but there's over 17,000, and look at the inequities there. And I talked to some parents and engaged them, and they were like, they're trying to flunk my student because they got up late with the system, and the system wasn't working right now. They're saying they're gonna flunk if they don't do 3 works or a month's worth of work. I mean, so I think it's gonna have a great impact because they're not even set up to go completely virtual. And I'm not advocating for them to go kind of part-time, but they're not set up for that. So it's going to have, I believe it's going to have a great impact on that. But what I did want to say is when people look at value, and we talked about what the narrative that Black boys and girls are believing about themselves. Think about, Stanford did this study years ago. And what they did was with 6th graders, they did with Black kids and Latinx kids, they had them do a 10-minute exercise on what they value. And after they did that 10-minute exercise, they tracked the kids through middle school and high school. And just that 10-minute exercise helped increase a better GPA and their attendance, and followed them and tracked them throughout high school. Just by doing a 10-minute exercise on what you value. Because when you say, what do you value, Greg? What you're saying is, I see you, Greg. So just a 10-minute exercise on values, what they said in that 10 minutes was, Black kids and Latinx kids, we see you. And I'm gonna say this, and I'll let Greg wrap it up with this. I was at Sheridan Elementary, and we were doing our first character point, who am I? And we're doing with 3rd graders. And this one kid, we start talking about who am I, and who you are has much more to do with how much money you have or don't have, where you live at, what type of car you have or don't, or your parents have or don't have. And I started going through that. And then we just started talking about how amazing you are just by being you. And we tell them that you're as unique as your fingerprints. No one else has your fingerprints or your DNA. So we start talking about how unique they are. This one little kid begins to cry. And I walk over to him. This little brown boy crying. And I'm like, what's wrong? And this little boy was answering questions like he was 15 years old. He begins to cry. And he says, I feel invisible in school. Mm. And then he said, but I also feel invisible at home. And when he said at home, he began to bawl. And I just sat there in him, in that space of pain, listening to him. He feels invisible at school. Now, this kid is brilliant. The kid is brilliant. And that, he says he feels invisible in school and invisible at home. Man, this is an uphill battle. And there's no easy answers to this. But having conversations like this begin to move us, I would say, in a better direction. Not that the ship was turned overnight, but the fact that there was, at sometimes there was 24, 25, 27 people on this call. If we can begin to create conversations, I think all of us on this call together can have an impact in our own realm of influence to begin to really change the way the Valley is shaped. Because the Valley has the gift of diversity. We just don't embrace it. So the Lehigh Valley has the gift of diversity, but we just don't embrace it. And just like Greg said, power's not going to let itself go easily. And we got the trifecta. Think about what just happened in the last 90 days. We had voter suppression, right? We got an educational system who failed our kids. We're getting computers home to them, right? And we saw police brutality. So we got the trifecta going on. And the only way we can change those systems is through policy. And that's all I have to say. I hope we answered all the questions because a lot at the end, I just looked through it. So hopefully we answered all the questions. And I'm gonna let Greg close this out.
So there is a greeting that the Zulu tribe of South Africa use each day when they see each other. It says sawubona, sawubona, sawubona. And that word sawubona means I see you, you are important to me, and I value you. Sawubona. I see you, you are important to me, and I value you, right? Sawubona. And then the response back of the people is Sakona, Sakona, Sakona. Now, Sakona means because you see me and value me, I am here. I am ready to engage. I am ready to engage. We don't, unfortunately, see each other as humans. We see some people as being less human than others, right? There was a time in our nation's history where Black folks were considered 3/5 of a human being, right? That was in some of our founding initial documents. So seeing somebody and hearing somebody and making them present, right, is critically important to service providers to be able to do, to bridge that gap. You know, there's an African proverb that says that the child that does not feel the love of his village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And so I want to also encourage us, while we're talking about young children, young Black boys in schools, I also want to encourage us on this call, for those of you that are working with Black employees. Let me say that. Because we oftentimes in our workplaces don't see our Black employees either, right? And there's a constant evaluation that has to happen. This is something that, you know, as I said, it's a system. It's well rehearsed. It's well manufactured. It's in America's water. And it's something that we have to consistently, intentionally deconstruct, which hopefully will lead to that more perfect union that we currently don't have, right? That we currently don't have. So, and this is all of our work to do. This is all of our work to do. I want to see my sons and daughter come home tonight. I need you to do this work. And when we don't do this work, when we don't interrupt it in our familiar social or work environments, what we really do in remaining silent is we empower others who have not joined this journey. We give them permission to dehumanize and to also kill. And we do it, you know, I mean, militarized police departments may have bullets. City governments have budgets. And in many areas, a budget is just a slower moving bullet that kills our communities as well. So all of these things we really have to look at specifically, you know, in this moment that we are in terms of our police departments, in terms of our nonprofits, in terms of our political systems and in terms of our economic engines. We have to really begin to do some of this hard work. And I hope we see it in our lifetime. You know, that's what gets me up in the morning. Mary Miller has put a comment. This gets back to COVID-19. Says, Dr. Gregory, I used to work in the OB unit in labor and delivery, and your comment about pain rings true from years ago when Black babies had procedures done to them. I remember hearing some of the doctors state that the babies of color didn't feel the same level of pain as the white babies. Wow. 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 Yeah, I'll take a step back for that one. Wow. But I mean, that's sad, but it is true.
Well, I just wanted to say, I mean, it was I'm old. It was many, many years ago. It was in the late 1970s, early 1980s. But when kids were born and they had to have like an IV started in through their umbilical area, or even the baby boys that got circumcised, there was a lot of commentary, I remember, by the docs, you know, in terms of pain thresholds.
Right.
I mean, I completely forgot about that because I've been away from OB for like 25 years. But when you said what you said about the pain, you know, experience, it came right back to me.
Right.
That I remembered hearing that.
Right. And thank you, Mary, and the Black community, that we are not monolithic. You know, all Black folks don't think alike, believe the same things. We're not monolithic, and I don't speak for all Black folk. But just as a generalization, the Black community overall in America has not had an overwhelmingly positive experience with the medical arts. Mm-hmm. Tuskegee.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So some of us aren't lining up for the vaccine for COVID-19.
Correct.
And some of us have witnessed literally a family member receive adverse care because of the color of their skin. Literally, mm-hmm. Like literally. So there are reasons why oftentimes, not just because of the vestiges of our enslaved ancestors living in our bones and all the microaggressions that traumatize us on a physiological level, but then in addition to that, we have these experiences in hospitals by paid professionals, you know, and we have these experiences when we're pulled over by, you know, persons who are sworn to protect mm-hmm. and serve. I mean, if you watch that video, those 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and you watch that officer place his knee on Brother Floyd's neck, it was as if he was on a South African safari. Like he had hunted and found an animal, a trophy. Something in him said that this man is not worthy of living. Mm-hmm. And I'm also not losing the fact, because this is how white supremacy works. It's a system. Remember, it's a system. In terms of looking at this from a critical race lens, that officer was the one that took his Brother Floyd's life. But the other aspect of that is that it's not lost on me that there was an Asian American and an African American officer who also stood by to sanction it. And that is the innocuous, insidious level of white supremacy that needs to co-opt Black and brown folk so that they can fit into the pathology of white supremacy. Somehow we don't take the pain, so we have to be shot in the street. They were running away, shoot them. And yet, many of us in the African-American community would say that if that was an animal, if that was a pet, if that was a dog, many white folks would have lost their mind. because we have more of a value for animals than we do for other human beings.
It's true.
So,
Well, I just thank you for everything that you both brought to the table today. It was just very, very amazing perspectives for me.
so there are some, thank you, Matt. I mean, there are some white affinity groups that I know of where, you know, white folks are joining virtually and virtual through Zoom to really help them understand their privilege. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you're bad. It means that there is this pre-pandemic condition called white supremacy that's killing all of us. So, and I often believe that when we are in spaces that are homogeneous racially, we are more open to talk about things that we don't talk about in mixed company, because sometimes the words don't come out right or we get clumsy. And so there are some white affinity groups that have sprung up in the Lehigh Valley that I would encourage you to check out. We can get you information on that. Julie has information on that. Julie Thomas.
If you contact me, you can probably just contact me on Facebook and just private message me. Just friend me and private message me and I'll send you information.
I would also encourage you to check out Freedom School. We are very serious about a freedom school movement in the Lehigh Valley. I don't think we can have enough of them. They're not, you know, they're not charter schools, they're not private schools, they're not trying to replace public schools, but they are teaching our children how to fall in love with themselves unapologetically. And so that curriculum starts with themselves. Their first week they learn, I can make a difference in myself. The second week, I can make a difference in my family. The third week curriculum, I can make a difference in my school. The fourth, I can make a difference in my community. I can make a difference in my nation. And then the last week, I can make a difference in the world. So it's concentric circles starting with themselves at the center. So I would ask that you would check out Freedom Schools. I would also ask, if you want additional information, that you would reach out to Julie Thomas's. She's been a big supporter of the Freedom School movement here in the Lehigh Valley as well.
Thank you. Thank
you
you
all for your
all
time.
so much. Yes, thank you all so much. I'm gonna turn things over to Julie so that she can do her wrap up. And I also just launched the polling. So if you all could, who are still on the call, could complete the poll and give us some feedback.
Okay, thank you all so much. Thank you, Ola. I want to say three things. Next week, our topic, next week is the last week, and the topic is called The House We Live In, the Need for Affordable Housing, with Councilwoman Cece Gerlich and community member Jeannie Garcia. And I recommend, I know this is recommended for the interns, but I recommend that you all watch a PBS program that's online that's called Race, the Power of Illusion. And the specific episode that relates to this topic is called The House We Live In. So I think it's worthwhile. The whole series is worthwhile, but that particular episode is very relevant. And then I want to end with something you've all heard, but it comes to my mind, or most of you have heard, in this particular webinar. And it's often credited to Lila Watson, but she credits it to Aboriginal activist group in Queensland. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. So thank you so much. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all for your time. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for your open minds and hearts.
Yes, thank you. Peace.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.